Welcome back. In the previous episode, I explained how Charlie Kirk's alleged assassination incredibly linked back in time to the events of 9/11, and even how Charlie appeared to complete the work of the allegedly hijacked Flight 93 by getting Donald Trump elected. Even with all the evidence I presented, it is doubtless that you find it highly improbable that Charlie Kirk's alleged death could in any way be the causal element of an event that occurred 24 years earlier. Typically, effect follows cause, not the other way around. While true, it is scientifically plausible, and it even has a name: retrocausality. But I didn't just imply that events were occurring out of order, but that time itself was reversing. Events of today are being reflected backward in time to manifest in the period of the mid to late 1880s. Whether that means the actual reversal of the direction of flow of time, or merely represents a closed loop which continues to flow in the same direction, like a stock car race around a circular track, is undetermined at this point. I merely point out the symbolism on display in the signage at the turning point event where the Charlie Kirk incident occurred, and how the various elements in the narrative all tend to refer to coming back or returning to a past time. For now, let's review some of the characters that appeared that day. Immediately after the Charlie Kirk incident, people started cheering, just like what happened with Jews during the crucifixion of Christ, and just like what happened on 9/11, with Israelis dancing in the street at seeing the carnage of the Twin Towers. How sad it is that humans cheer the death of their own. Other animals have been shown to hold wakes and mourn their dead. They have more compassion than these creatures walking among us. But then again, the chosen think of themselves as racially superior, the master race. To them, the Gentiles are nothing more than cattle. You don't grieve when you send cattle to the butcher or step on an ant, do you? That's their role in the game. But it's also our role in the game as well. And we all must play our roles, mustn't we? One person in the crowd quickly began to draw attention to himself by claiming that he was the shooter. His name was George Zinn, and he was a member of the Chosen. Amazingly, this apparent crisis actor also appeared in a 9/11 Memories video talking about his recollection of the events of 9/11. Apparently, he was in Denver on 10 September 2001 for the opening of the new Broncos Stadium. Intriguingly, that game was against the New York Giants, and the Broncos won. The next morning, while getting ready to fly back to Salt Lake, the attacks became known, and Zinn commented on how he seemed to immediately know Al-Qaeda was responsible. The point of this is that this video conveniently surfaced 2 days after the Charlie Kirk incident, and it provides us with yet another direct link to 9/11. Likely, its whole point. Zinn was also charged in 2013 with threatening to place bombs at the Salt Lake City Marathon finish line following the Boston bombing. This obvious decoy appeared to divert attention away from the real shooter, if there even was a real shooter. It also implies collusion, which leads to conspiracy, which itself tends to muddy the ubiquitous lone gunman narrative presented to us. But what part of the established narrative of Christ does George Zinn possibly play? Simple. The role of Peter, the one who cut the ear off of Malchus when he came for Christ, and who later denied Jesus 3 times after he was taken into custody. It's a mirrored opposite. Instead of denying his role in supporting Christ, Zinn affirms his role in wanting to kill the new Christ, Charlie Kirk. And of course, the reference to placing bombs at a marathon introduces the word marathon, which refers to a long process, like a 24-year crucifixion to destroy a 250-year-old country, created in the image of a 2,000-year-old Christ. It's interesting to note that 2013, the year Zinn was charged with threatening to place bombs at the marathon, is right in the middle between 9/11 and Charlie Kirk's alleged assassination. Indeed, the date of the marathon was just 4 months off of that precise midpoint. What are the odds that there's a single guy famously prominent at the beginning, the midpoint, and the end of this crucifixion that I claim is taking place? The other person questioned and briefly detained that day was named Zachariah Qureshi. After the alleged shooting, he had left the campus and was at his Provo apartment when police arrived to say that he was a person of interest. He was released a few hours later. Given the Middle Eastern-sounding name, I'd say he was likely chosen by the chosen to help muddy the waters and cause confusion. And, of course, to blame the event on Islam, just like on 9/11. Interestingly, another man who actually looks like a twin of George Zinn, but was nowhere near Utah at the time, was 77-year-old retired banker Michael Mallinson, who lives in Toronto. Somehow, Mallinson was singled out as a suspect, even though he claims to have never been to Utah. The rumor apparently began when his photo appeared next to George Zinn on an account that was posing as a Fox News channel, Reno 11. So, how did this fake account just happen to have Mallinson's photo, someone that looks remarkably similar to George Zinn? Clearly, this incident was planted by intelligence organizations. Again, an action directly pointing to conspiracy. But why? Why bring attention to a 77-year-old retired banker from Toronto? Was it to introduce the number 77, to hearken back to Flight 77 that allegedly struck the Pentagon? Or was it merely to introduce Toronto and/or Canada to the Charlie Kirk narrative? But why do that? Once again, to link the Charlie Kirk incident back to the events of 9/11. This is how the elite communicate, my fellow souls. And there's several things quite important, but little known about Canada with regards to 9/11. The first thing that most everyone has likely forgotten is that on 9/11, U.S. airspace was locked down. They called it a ground stop. No flights in or out of the country. In fact, more than 200 flights were diverted to Canada that day under Operation Yellow Ribbon, which I joked in prior books should have been called Operation Yellowstain for pissing on our neighbors to the north. But that wasn't the most amazing thing to happen that day. You see, after the towers fell in New York on the morning of 9/11, another plane, Korean Airlines Flight 085, out of Seoul, South Korea, and bound for New York, was nearing a landing in Anchorage, Alaska, when somebody on board allegedly sent a text message to the FAA. It simply read HJK, the international code for hijacking. And there's just one little problem. They weren't being hijacked. F-15s were scrambled to escort the aircraft to Whitehorse, Yukon Territory. Prior to entering Canadian airspace, Washington ordered the aircraft to change its transponder squawk code to 7500, a code that only hijacked planes would broadcast. These instructions were so insane that controllers delayed 20 minutes before relaying them to the equally incredulous pilots. Ultimately, the flight crew obeyed the instructions. But it wasn't just Korean Air Flight 085 that was rerouted. Another Korean Air 747 jumbo jet, a cargo version, Flight 281, was also sent to Whitehorse. On the ground, schools and government buildings were ordered evacuated, and the people were told to prepare for a mass casualty incident involving aircraft. Emergency response teams were dispatched to the airport. Snipers took positions on roofs. Nowhere else in the world was a community evacuated that day, but it happened in Whitehorse. Eventually, both planes landed safely a few minutes before 3 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. No terrorists were found, and there is still, to this day, no explanation as to who sent the text message. I have discussed this incident in great length in multiple books, where I explain the symbolism behind it. Indeed, the entire 9/11 incident deserves its own video series devoted to the real story they were giving us. I simply mention it here because 10 years after 9/11, the Toronto hearings were held at Ryerson University in Toronto, Canada, from 8 to 11 September 2011. The very same time frame that Phase 1 of the Flight 93 Memorial was dedicated. The goal of the hearings was to assess the historical truth of 9/11, much of which seemed to go against the official narrative. Again, the elite are trying to point us in the direction of 9/11 during the Charlie Kirk Incident. But not just 9/11. By directly referencing Toronto, they were directing us to focus on baseball itself, as we discovered in a previous video, with those baseball hand signals being made by Charlie's security team in the moments before his alleged death. You see, conveniently, the Toronto Blue Jays were in the World Series in 2025. Again, more references to birds or planes or things with wings, which began 14 days after Kirk's alleged death. The better team, the Blue Jays, would lose Game 7 to the LA Dodgers, which was their 9th World Series win. Again, the number 9 appears, as we will see again and again. We also have Los Angeles, the City of Angels, the city that was virtually reduced to ash like a phoenix. Remember this for later. Remember that the 3 planes that allegedly impacted buildings on 9/11 were all heading for Los Angeles. And of course, there's the Dodgers, symbolically referencing those who are able to dodge and avoid any sort of punishment for their crimes, like the Chosen. They were literally revealing that truth was being dodged. There is just so much multi-layered symbolism being displayed. Even Michael Mallinson's age of 77 recalls all the instances of 7 and 77 in the events of 9/11, such as Flight 77 being in the air for 77 minutes prior to allegedly striking the Pentagon, located at 77 degrees west longitude, and Flight 93 allegedly crashing 77 minutes after Flight 11 allegedly struck the North Tower. Flight 77, if you remember, made a 330-degree turn prior to allegedly striking the Pentagon, as if it was foretelling when time itself would reverse and travel in a loop. Does this reference the turning point during the future Charlie Kirk incident? Might that strange 330-degree turn, with the obvious 33, imply that the military may have been involved in the latter? Even more disturbing, at least for me, is the fact that the 330-degree turn directly mimics a vision of time that I've had in my mind all of my life. I see time as a path through the woods with hills and valleys and twists and turns. The turn mimicked a turn that I saw with time beginning around 2009 and crossing back over around 2020. It's one of the reasons that I was able to predict the pandemic 3 years before it happened. Anyway, if you look at the distance traveled after the loop of Flight 77 makes its crossing and the distance traveled to reach the Pentagon, it seems to reflect the 2025 time frame in my vision, for lack of a better word. The final suspect, Tyler Robinson, we were told, was allegedly compelled by his father to turn himself in. However, there's confusion about whether they really said father. Some claim they said family member. But even that statement appears to be unsubstantiated. Amazingly, this surrender allegedly took place 33 hours after the shooting. It didn't, but this is the narrative that they are overtly presenting to put the number 33 in our faces. But more important is the implied fact that the Father delivered the Son, who allegedly performed the crucifixion, in 33 hours in a total mirror echo of God the Father, who allegedly delivered his Son, Christ, to the cross at the age of 33 years. Again, they are painting this as a mirrored reflection. They want you to figure out what you are seeing and link it back to the story of Christ. They want you to know that Israel was behind this event, just like they were behind the murder of Christ and 9/11. It's part of the repeating narrative that can never be changed, and they are actively screaming it from the mountaintops. Yes, we did it, they are gleefully exclaiming, and there's not a damn thing that you can do about it. And then there's the totally bogus narrative of the actions of this fictional shooter that the FBI, or Mossad East, presented to the public, which has so many holes that you can drive a semi through it. Robinson allegedly has the barrel of the gun down his pants, so he's walking stiff-legged in video. He supposedly walks up some stairs, but we are only shown still images instead of the actual video to see how he walked up those stairs with the rifle barrel in his pants. However, both legs are bending normally in the stills, and the backpack was way too small for the rifle. The barrel itself would have been 24 inches if it was a carbine, and the stock was at least that long or longer. The backpack wasn't stretched as if something long was inside it. But even with all of that BS, supposedly, after taking the shot, we are told that he pauses to break down the rifle to somehow fit it in his backpack. Well, if it fit in the backpack, why walk with a gun in his pants? Either way, this doesn't match video taken immediately following the shot, showing a person getting up and running on the roof. This rifle is not a quick takedown. It requires a screwdriver, and some reports say an Allen wrench, and around a minute to break down. He allegedly forgets the screwdriver and conveniently leaves it on the roof, filled with his DNA. Why? Because that's the only physical proof we have that Tyler Robinson was actually on the roof. Somewhere in all of this, he changes his clothes, although instead of talking like a man in his later text messages, where he conveniently confesses to his crimes, he talks like a woman and says that he changed his outfit. And supposedly Robinson went to a great deal of trouble inscribing messages on his bullet casings, which he apparently never planned on leaving since he broke down the rifle and took it with him, and expressed regret at having to leave it in the woods. But before leaving it, we are told that he stopped and reassembled the gun and wrapped it in a towel, I guess just in case somebody wanted to use it. He must be seriously OCD. But how does he complete this reassembly without the screwdriver that he apparently left on the roof? The official narrative is blatantly bogus and makes no logical sense at all because it's not meant to make any sense. Just like 9/11 and a host of other false flag shootings perpetrated by the government and/or Israel, it's carefully meant to telegraph another story, a story from long ago. I'll admit the role of the alleged shooter and his crazy actions had me baffled for a while, and I've been dissecting the symbolism behind these types of events for 15 years. But the fact that he was allegedly in love with a man playing a woman is the key. If this is truly a replay of the story of Christ, then all the characters in the earlier version must be present now. Ergo, I believe the alleged shooter was meant to portray God the Father, while the boyfriend-girlfriend Lance refers to the feminine God of the Old Testament, the female playing a male. Remember, this is a mirror reflection. This is why all the incriminating evidence came from Lance and why it was conveniently laid out to answer all of the pertinent questions. Because it came from someone portraying a God. This time, it's God the Father, Tyler, on the roof, representing the heavens, that allegedly kills the Son, while with Christ, the God of the Old Testament, playing God, was the one who killed Jesus. The perfect grammar in the text messages that seems like it was written by a boomer reveals it was written by something old, something representing a God. As for changing his clothes multiple times, it has to do with changing personas. It has to do with the God of the Old Testament pretending to be God the Father during the crucifixion of Christ. In this case, since it's a mirrored event, Tyler, in the role of God the Father, needs to similarly reflect these changing roles. God the Father would never resort to killing or crucifixion. That's why you'll never see an image of Tyler shooting the gun on the roof. And then, conveniently, Lance disappears, just like the God of the Old Testament. This is all a manufactured narrative to teach you about what really happened to Christ. Naturally, most of you will disagree, since you don't believe the God of the Old Testament is Satan and a female. The truth is right in front of your faces and presented in the Bible. But why disassemble and then reassemble, and then disassemble and then reassemble the instrument of vengeance? At this point, I can only make an educated guess on that aspect. More than any other part of this analysis, this will likely be subject to change. I believe that it possibly refers to the periodic replays of the story of Christ that takes place throughout history. The rifle represents the cross, or the crossing, and thanks to the mirror, is destined to replay throughout time. But it also represents something that was allegedly brought from the heavens to the earth. Remember, they went to great lengths to show us the suspect running across the roof and jumping to the ground. However, also remember that we never saw the gun on the roof because that's a product of the physical world. The roof represents the heavens. The only thing left on the roof was a screwdriver, a precision instrument, as opposed to an imprecise hammer that is essentially used for creating or disassembling things. In particular, it was used to assemble the weapon and disassemble it. The message being given is that the alleged death of Charlie Kirk was brought about by the gods, sanctioned by divine decree, or, of course, by those who seek to play God. You likely will doubt the above analysis. That's fine. You can dismiss pieces and parts, but you shouldn't dismiss the entirety of this presentation. If you do, you are walking over a cliff without truly knowing why. I do understand, though, Most people ignore what the Bible is truly telling them. And this unfortunately includes all priests, preachers, pastors, and popes. Do any of these misleaders know the truth? The Vatican likely does, and most other priests and preachers should have been intelligent enough to figure it out, like I did, especially since it's their life's work. The only reason that they haven't is because of their brainwashing. One last thing. Did you notice all the lightning symbolism that was in place throughout the signage for the Charlie Kirk event? Christ had a very intriguing analogy for lightning once. He said that he beheld Satan as lightning fall from heaven. That lightning is like a gun from a rooftop, a flash of light, a crash of thunder. By including the taunt to prove me wrong, it's very similar to the press calling the Titanic unsinkable before it sank. The ship is unsinkable. Prove me wrong. It's like they were similarly taunting the gods. More specifically, the Jewish god, Satan, to prove Charlie wrong. It's intriguing to note that I don't believe the true Titanic sank in the North Atlantic in 1912. I believe that it was switched with its older sister, Olympic, to collect the insurance. And as I stated, I likewise don't believe Charlie Kirk is really dead either. But then again, this is a mirrored event. Maybe it's not Charlie's fate that has been switched. Not to digress too much, as I prove in my books, the story of Titanic was the story of Christ. It was a mirrored replay that must replay exactly as the original. If a switch occurred with Titanic, a switch must have occurred with Christ and with the Charlie Kirk incident. That said, what, pray tell, may have been switched with the latter? Was it the weapon, since the wound is inconsistent with the .30-06? Was it the alleged perpetrator, since photos of the person walking up the stairs don't look like Tyler Robinson? Or was it, perchance, the wife? What if the Erica Kirk you believed was really Erica was actually a double? Or perhaps it's all of the above. Hold that thought for later. If you found this topic interesting, then please check out my other videos and my books. My website is www.mastersofthemirror.com. Thanks.